Charlotte Bennett's Manhattan penthouse reflected her carefully curated success. Italian leather furniture, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Central Park's autumn splendor. At 32, she commanded New York's most exclusive event planning company, orchestrating million-dollar galas for celebrities and Fortune 500 executives. Her life appeared flawless from the outside, but behind designer clothes and professional accolades lay a woman desperately trying to meet impossible family expectations. "The Henderson wedding netted us $2 million in revenue," her assistant, Madison, announced, reviewing quarterly reports while Charlotte paced her office like a caged animal. "3 more bookings this size and we'll hit your expansion goals." Charlotte barely heard the financial update. Her phone displayed 17 missed calls from her mother, Eleanor Bennett, and a text message that made her stomach clench. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Grandfather's trust requirement still in effect. "Hope you have good news about your personal life, Mother." The Bennett Family Trust, $50 million contingent on Charlotte being married by her 33rd birthday, a Victorian-era provision designed to ensure family stability and continuation of the bloodline. 6 months remained before her birthday, and Charlotte's romantic life consisted of failed dates with men who either wanted her money or were intimidated by her success. "Charlotte, darling," Eleanor's voice carried its familiar mixture of affection and disapproval when she finally returned the calls. "I've spoken with the board. They're growing concerned about the trust deadline. Perhaps it's time to consider more practical arrangements." "Practical arrangements?" Charlotte repeated, though she suspected what her mother meant. "Richard Ashford has expressed renewed interest. His divorce was finalized last month, and he's quite successful in his own right. The families have known each other for decades." Charlotte suppressed a shudder. Richard Ashford, arrogant, entitled, and still bitter about Charlotte rejecting his advances in college. The idea of marrying him for financial security made her skin crawl, but the alternative was losing everything she'd built. "I'll handle it, Mother," Charlotte said firmly. "I don't need Richard Ashford or anyone else's help." But as she ended the call, Charlotte stared at her reflection in the office windows, seeing a successful woman trapped by circumstances beyond her control. The trust had been established by her great-grandfather, a robber baron who believed women needed husbands to manage their inheritance responsibly. Fighting the legal requirements would take years and cost millions in legal fees she couldn't afford. An idea began forming, desperate, risky, but potentially brilliant. She needed a fiancé, not necessarily a husband, someone who could convince her family and the board that she was settled and responsible, someone who would disappear after the trust funds were released. Charlotte opened her laptop and searched for professional actors, New York City, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard as she contemplated the insanity of what she was considering. But desperation bred innovation, and Charlotte Bennett had built her empire by taking calculated risks when conventional options failed. "Hello, my Stop Racism family. Thank you for tuning in today. Before we dive deeper into the story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments below. Also, I'd love to know your thoughts. What did you think of the story so far? Let us know in the comments. We love reading them, and trust me, your words motivate us to keep making these videos. Let's make this video reach at least 50 comments. Your support means the world to us, and it drives us to create even more meaningful content for you. So don't forget to comment, share, and keep the positivity flowing. The Bennett family compound in the Hamptons represented 4 generations of accumulated wealth and social climbing. Charlotte had grown up surrounded by portraits of stern ancestors who'd built fortunes in railroads and steel, their disapproving faces seeming to judge every decision she made. The family's Sunday dinners were exercises in maintaining appearances, conversations carefully scripted to avoid anything that might threaten their carefully constructed social standing. "The Ashfords have always been appropriate partners for our family," Eleanor had explained during Charlotte's teenage years, her voice carrying the weight of generations of strategic marriages. "Breeding matters, dear. Education, background, the right connections. These things determine the quality of your children and your social position." Charlotte had absorbed these lessons unconsciously, her dating history reflecting her mother's preferences for men from good families. Code for wealthy, white, and socially connected. Her college boyfriend had been a senator's son. Her brief engagement to a hedge fund manager had ended when she discovered his cocaine addiction, and her subsequent relationships had all followed similar patterns of privilege and disappointment. The Family's casual racism was so embedded in their worldview that they barely recognized it as prejudice. Urban problems, those people, and concerns about declining neighborhood standards peppered their conversations like seasoning, creating an atmosphere where Charlotte had learned to equate success with whiteness and failure with everything. Kelsey, her circle of friends, reinforced these attitudes with the subtle consistency of shared assumptions. At charity galas and private club events, Charlotte moved through crowds of similar women, educated, accomplished, and unconsciously dismissive of anyone who didn't share their background and advantages. "I simply don't understand how she can date that man," Charlotte's friend Victoria had whispered at a recent fundraiser, referring to a mutual acquaintance who'd begun seeing a successful black attorney. "I mean, he's educated and everything, but what will people think? What about their children?" Charlotte had nodded along, participating in the casual cruelty without examining the assumptions behind it. Her world was small, exclusive, and rigidly structured around maintaining social hierarchies that had existed since before she was born. But desperation had a way of forcing examination of previously unquestioned beliefs. As Charlotte researched professional actors who might be willing to pose as her fiancé, she found herself confronting the reality that her social circle was too small and too interconnected for deception. Anyone she hired would need to be someone her family wouldn't expect to encounter in their normal social activities. The classified ad she finally composed was carefully worded: "Professional actor needed for short-term engagement portrayal. Must be comfortable with high society social functions. Excellent compensation for the right candidate. Discretion essential." Charlotte hesitated before adding the final line that would change everything: "Seeking someone outside my usual social circle for authenticity." She told herself it was about practical considerations, avoiding recognition, maintaining the deception's believability. But something deeper was shifting in her thinking, a recognition that her usual social circle had become a prison of expectations and prejudices that served no one's interests except those who benefited from maintaining the status quo. The auditions were held in Charlotte's corporate conference room, a space designed to intimidate with its mahogany table, leather chairs, and intimidating view of Manhattan's financial district. She'd received 47 responses to her classified ad, but had narrowed the candidates to 12 men who possessed the right combination of acting experience, physical attractiveness, and professional demeanor. The first 8 candidates had been predictably similar, aspiring actors from Connecticut and New Jersey, all white, all possessing the kind of bland handsomeness that would blend seamlessly into Charlotte's social events. They performed their audition pieces competently, discussing their theater backgrounds and availability with professional courtesy. "I appreciate your time," Charlotte told the 9th candidate, a forgettable man named Bradley who'd graduated from Yale Drama School. "We'll be in touch." But Charlotte knew none of them would work. They were too familiar, too much like the men she'd dated before, too likely to be recognized by someone in her extended social network. The deception required someone completely outside her usual sphere, someone her family and friends would never expect her to choose. The 10th candidate changed everything. Damon Williams entered the conference room with quiet confidence, his presence immediately commanding attention in ways that had nothing to do with his considerable height or athletic build. At 34, he carried himself with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, his tailored suit and polished appearance suggesting success that didn't need to announce itself. "Ms. Bennett," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile that reached his intelligent dark eyes. "Thank you for considering me for this opportunity." Charlotte felt her preconceptions shift as she shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip and the way he met her gaze directly without deference or challenge. His headshot hadn't prepared her for the reality of his presence, the way he seemed to fill the space around him with calm authority. "Tell me about your acting background," she said, settling into her usual interviewer role while studying him with new curiosity. 10 years of stage work, primarily classical theater," Damon replied, taking the seat across from her with unhurried movements. "Shakespeare, Chekhov, August Wilson. I've also done some television work and corporate training videos." "And you're comfortable with high society social functions?" Charlotte asked, the question carrying undertones she hadn't intended. Something flickered across Damon's expression, amusement perhaps, or recognition of the assumptions behind her question. "I've attended my share of galas and charity events, board meetings, Corporate functions, political fundraisers, I can navigate formal social situations. Charlotte found herself studying his face, looking for signs of discomfort or uncertainty that would justify her doubts about his suitability. Instead, she saw composure and intelligence, a man who seemed perfectly at ease despite the unusual nature of the interview. The compensation would be substantial, she said, naming a figure that made most candidates' eyes widen with obvious interest. Damon nodded thoughtfully. And the timeline? 6 months, potentially less. Various social functions, family gatherings, business events. The role would require convincing portrayal of a romantic relationship. Convincing how? Damon asked, his tone remaining professional despite the personal nature of the question. Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks as she considered the implications. Physical affection appropriate to an engaged couple. Hand-holding, casual touches, perhaps kissing for public appearances. I see, Damon replied, his expression unreadable. And after 6 months? The engagement would end amicably. You'd be free to pursue other opportunities with excellent references and additional compensation for your discretion. Damon leaned back in his chair, studying Charlotte with the same careful attention she'd been giving him. Can I ask why you need a fake fiancé rather than a real relationship? The directness of his question caught Charlotte off guard. She'd prepared answers for questions about logistics and compensation, but not for someone who would probe the emotional reality behind. Her desperate scheme, family trust requirements, she said finally, deciding on partial honesty. I need to be married by my 33rd birthday to access my inheritance. This seemed more practical than rushing into a real marriage with someone unsuitable. Damon nodded slowly, seeming to weigh her explanation against observations he kept to himself. And you think I'm suitable for this deception? I think you're professional enough to handle the requirements, Charlotte replied, though she was beginning to realize that Damon Williams might be more than she'd bargained for in ways she hadn't anticipated. The contract signing took place in Charlotte's lawyer's office, a mahogany-paneled space that reeked of old money and older privilege. Charlotte had insisted on legal documentation to protect both parties, though she suspected Damon found the formal approach somewhat amusing. Non-disclosure agreement, performance expectations, compensation schedule, her attorney, Harrison Webb, explained as he spread the documents across his desk. Ms. Bennett has been quite thorough in protecting her interests. Damon reviewed each page with careful attention, asking intelligent questions about termination clauses and public appearance requirements. Charlotte found herself impressed by his legal sophistication, though she tried to suppress the surprise in her voice when he requested modifications to several contract terms. I'd like to add a clause about mutual respect, Damon said, his pen poised over the signature line. This arrangement requires trust on both sides. I need assurance that I'll be treated as an equal partner in this deception, not as hired help. The request stung because it revealed assumptions Charlotte hadn't realized she was making. Of course, she said quickly, though Harrison's raised eyebrow suggested he found the addition unusual. And I'd like to establish some boundaries about public displays of affection, Damon continued. I'm comfortable with hand-holding and brief kisses, but anything more intimate should be discussed and agreed upon beforehand. Charlotte felt her face warm at the clinical discussion of physical contact, realizing she hadn't fully considered the personal implications of their arrangement. That's reasonable, she agreed, signing her name with slightly unsteady hands. The first test came 3 days later at the Metropolitan Museum's annual gala, an event Charlotte had attended for years, but now approached with unprecedented anxiety. Damon arrived at her penthouse, wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo that transformed his already impressive presence into something that made her pulse quicken in ways she hadn't anticipated. You look beautiful, he said simply, offering her his arm with natural gallantry that seemed genuine rather than performed. Charlotte had chosen her dress carefully, a midnight blue gown that emphasized her figure without being provocative, jewelry that suggested wealth without ostentation. But standing next to Damon, she felt unexpectedly nervous about the impression they would make together. Remember, she said as they entered the museum's grand hall, we've been dating for 8 months, got engaged last month. You're in corporate. Consulting. We met through mutual friends. Relax, Damon replied, his hand warm and steady on her back as they approached the reception area. I've got this. But Charlotte's anxiety proved justified the moment they encountered her social circle Victoria Chen, her closest friend since college, approached with barely concealed shock written across her perfectly made-up features. "Charlotte, darling," Victoria exclaimed, her gaze flickering between Charlotte and Damon with poorly concealed curiosity. "You didn't mention you were bringing someone." "Victoria, I'd like you to meet my fiancé, Damon Williams," Charlotte said, surprised by how natural the introduction felt. "Damon, this is Victoria Chen, one of my oldest friends." Damon stepped forward with the easy confidence that seemed to characterize everything he did, extending his hand to Victoria with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Victoria. Charlotte has told me so much about you." Victoria's response was a masterclass in polite racism, the slightly too wide smile, the way her eyes catalogued Damon's appearance as though assessing his worthiness, the subtle shift in her posture that suggested discomfort disguised as courtesy. "How wonderful," Victoria said, her voice carrying undertones that made Charlotte's stomach clench. "And how did you two meet?" Charlotte had prepared for this question, but before she could answer, Damon spoke with easy warmth that suggested genuine affection. "Through mutual friends at a charity fundraiser for literacy programs. Charlotte was organizing the event and I was volunteering. She was so passionate about the cause that I couldn't help but be impressed. The story was believable, touching, and delivered with such natural sincerity that Charlotte almost believed it herself. But Victoria's expression suggested she was processing information that didn't fit her preconceptions about Charlotte's romantic choices. "How interesting," Victoria said finally, her tone suggesting anything but interest. "Well, I'm sure you'll enjoy the evening. The museum always puts on such elegant events." As Victoria moved away, Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment at her friend's obvious discomfort. But Damon seemed unaffected by the subtle hostility, guiding Charlotte toward the bar with natural protective instincts that felt surprisingly comforting. "She's not what I expected from your description," Damon observed quietly, his voice carrying no judgment but clear understanding of what had just occurred. "She's usually more welcoming," Charlotte said defensively, though she realized the defense was as much for herself as for Victoria. "I'm sure she is," Damon replied with gentle irony that suggested he'd encountered similar reactions before, "to people she considers appropriate for you." The morning after the Met Gala brought a deluge of phone calls that confirmed Charlotte's worst fears about her social circle's reaction to Damon. Her mother's voice carried thinly veiled panic when she called at 7 a.m., clearly having heard from multiple sources about Charlotte's surprising choice in Fiancé. "Darling, I've had 3 calls already this morning," Eleanor began without preamble. "Victoria Chen, the Ashfords, and Margaret Harrison all mentioned meeting your new friend at the museum gala. Perhaps we should discuss this development in person." Charlotte closed her eyes, recognizing the tone that had preceded every difficult conversation of her childhood. "His name is Damon Williams, Mother, and yes, we should definitely discuss this." The emergency lunch meeting took place at Eleanor's private club, a bastion of old money privilege where Charlotte had learned to navigate the complex social hierarchies that governed her world. Eleanor arrived with Charlotte's Aunt Patricia, forming a united front of family concern that felt more like an intervention than a celebration. "Tell us about this man," Eleanor said without preamble, her tone suggesting she was prepared for disappointment. His background, his family, his prospects. Charlotte had prepared detailed answers, but sitting across from her mother and aunt in the club's formal dining room, she felt like a teenager defending an inappropriate boyfriend rather than a successful businesswoman making her own choices. "Damon is in corporate consulting," she began, sticking to the agreed-upon cover story. "He's well-educated, professionally successful, and we share similar values about family and career." "But what's his background?" Patricia pressed, her voice carrying the kind of persistence that had made her a formidable society matron. "Where did he grow up? What do his parents do? These things matter, Charlotte." The questions revealed assumptions Charlotte had never been forced to examine, the casual belief that personal worth could be determined by family pedigree and social connections. She found herself defending Damon with unexpected passion, surprised by how protective she felt of a man she barely knew. "He's intelligent, kind, and treats me with respect," Charlotte said firmly. "Those qualities matter more than whatever social checklist you're trying to apply." Eleanor's expression softened slightly, though concern remained evident in her voice. "Of course they do, darling, but you must consider the practical implications. The board meeting is next week, and they'll want to meet your fiancé. Are you certain he can handle that level of scrutiny? The question struck at Charlotte's own doubts about the deception. The charity gala had been one thing, a social event, where Damon could blend into the crowd and make polite conversation. But a board meeting would involve serious business discussions, detailed questions about his background and intentions, and the kind of formal scrutiny that could expose their arrangement. He can handle anything you throw at him, Charlotte said, with more confidence than she felt. You might be surprised by what he's capable of. But as she left the club, Charlotte found herself questioning whether she'd made a terrible mistake. The board meeting would include her grandfather's former business partners, men who'd built fortunes through ruthless assessment of character and motivation. If they suspected deception, the trust would be forfeit and her company would face bankruptcy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damon. How did lunch with your family go? Need to debrief before the board meeting? The simple message, with its assumption that she might need support and its reference to their shared challenge, did something unexpected to Charlotte's anxiety. Instead of feeling alone with her doubts, she realized she had a partner in this deception, someone who understood the stakes and was invested in their mutual success. Meet me at my office at 4, she replied. We need to prepare for the wolves. Damon's response came immediately. Looking forward to it, we've got this. The confidence in his message, the easy assumption of partnership, made Charlotte realize that somewhere between signing contracts and surviving charity galas, she'd stopped thinking of Damon as hired help and started thinking of him as an ally. The shift surprised her with its intensity and its implications for the months ahead. How's this story hitting you so far? Tell us in the comments. If you're loving it, type 1. If not, type 0. We want to know what you think. Damon arrived at Charlotte's office that evening, carrying takeout from a soul food restaurant she'd never heard of, his presence transforming the sterile corporate environment into something unexpectedly warm and inviting. He'd changed from his usual business attire into jeans and a casual shirt that made him seem more approachable, less like a hired actor and more like a man she was genuinely getting to know. I thought you might be hungry, he said, unpacking containers of food that filled the office with rich, unfamiliar aromas, and I figured we should eat while we strategize for the board meeting. Charlotte realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast, too nervous about the family lunch and upcoming challenges to think about food. That's thoughtful. Thank you. As they shared the meal, collard greens, cornbread, and perfectly seasoned chicken that tasted unlike anything Charlotte had ever experienced, she found herself asking questions that went beyond their professional arrangement. Where did you grow up? She asked, surprising herself with genuine curiosity rather than strategic information gathering. Brooklyn, Damon replied, his voice carrying warmth that suggested fond memories. My father was a high school history teacher. My mother worked as a nurse. 3 younger sisters, all of whom are more successful than I am now. The casual revelation challenged Charlotte's assumptions about his background and motivations. More successful how? Dr. Angela Williams Patterson, pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai, Damon said with obvious pride. Dr. Monica Williams, research scientist at Columbia, and Jessica Williams, who just made partner at a law firm in D.C. I'm the family disappointment, who chose acting over a real career. Charlotte stared at him, processing information that completely reframed her understanding of who he was and why he'd accepted her offer. You come from a family of overachievers, and you're calling yourself a disappointment. My parents wanted all their children to have stable careers that couldn't be taken away, Damon explained, his tone carrying understanding rather than resentment. They lived through civil rights struggles, economic uncertainty, and they wanted us to have security they'd never experienced. Acting seemed frivolous compared to medicine and law, but you chose it anyway, Charlotte observed, recognizing the courage required to pursue passion over security. I chose it because I love it, Damon replied simply, and because I'm good at it. But I also work corporate consulting to pay the bills, which is why I'm qualified to convincingly discuss business strategy with your board. The revelation that Damon actually possessed the professional expertise he'd been hired to pretend to have struck Charlotte as both reassuring and somehow disappointing. She'd been preparing to coach him through business discussions, but apparently he needed no such assistance. Why did you take this job? She asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at her since their first meeting. You clearly don't need the money desperately, and this kind of deception seems beneath someone with your qualifications. Damon was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with the same careful attention he brought to everything. Curiosity. Mostly. I wanted to understand what would drive a successful woman to hire a fake fiancé rather than pursue a real relationship. And what have you concluded? Charlotte asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear his assessment. That you're trapped by expectations that don't serve anyone except people who benefit from controlling your choices. Damon replied with gentle directness. And that you're braver than you give yourself credit for, but scared of disappointing. People who've never had to make the kind of sacrifices they expect from you. The insight hit Charlotte like a physical blow, cutting through defenses she hadn't realized she'd constructed. That's quite an analysis for someone who's known me for a week. I'm a good observer of human nature, Damon said without arrogance. It's what makes me a decent actor and a good consultant. People reveal themselves in how they handle pressure, how they treat others, what they're willing to risk for what they want. And what do you think I want? Charlotte asked, the question coming out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Damon leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. I think you want to be seen and valued for who you actually are, not just what you represent to your family or your social circle. I think you want to make choices based on your own values rather than inherited expectations. And I think you want to be loved for reasons that have nothing to do with your trust fund or your social connections. The accuracy of his assessment left Charlotte speechless, recognizing truths about herself that she'd never articulated even in her own mind. This man she'd hired to pretend to love her had seen through her carefully constructed facade to understand desires she'd barely acknowledged to herself. That's a lot to want, she said quietly, her voice carrying decades of accumulated disappointment. It's what everyone deserves, Damon replied with conviction that suggested he'd never doubted his own worth or the possibility of authentic connection. The question is whether you're willing to risk the safety of your current life to pursue something real. The Bennett family board meeting convened in the mahogany-paneled conference room of their Midtown law offices, where portraits of 4 generations of family patriarchs gazed down with stern disapproval. Charlotte entered with Damon at her side, acutely aware that the next 2 hours would determine whether her desperate gamble paid off or destroyed everything she'd built. Gentlemen, Eleanor announced to the assembled board members, I'd like you to meet Charlotte's fiancé, Damon Williams. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable, a ripple of surprise that passed through the room like an electric current. Charlotte watched as her grandfather's former business partners, men who'd built empires through calculated assessment of risk and opportunity, processed the reality of her choice with barely concealed shock. Mr. Williams, said Jonathan Ashford, Richard's father and the board's chairman, extending his hand with the kind of politeness that carried underlying menace. We weren't expecting this development. Damon met the handshake with calm confidence, his grip firm and his gaze steady. Mr. Ashford, it's an honor to meet Charlotte's family. She speaks of you all with great respect. I'm sure she does, Jonathan replied, his tone suggesting anything but pleasure at the introduction. Perhaps you could tell us about your background, your family, your business interests. Charlotte felt her stomach clench as the interrogation began in earnest. These men had destroyed business rivals through careful questioning and strategic pressure. If they suspected deception, they would pursue it with ruthless efficiency. I work in corporate consulting, specializing in organizational development and strategic planning, Damon replied smoothly. I have an MBA from Wharton and 10 years of experience helping companies navigate complex transitions. The lie came so naturally that Charlotte almost believed it herself, though she knew Damon's actual consulting work was part-time and far less prestigious than he was suggesting. Wharton? Harold Bennett, Charlotte's great-uncle, raised an eyebrow. With interest. What year did you graduate? Class of 2018, Damon replied without hesitation. Concentrated in finance and strategy. Charlotte held her breath, knowing that Harold's son had graduated from Wharton around the same time. One phone call could expose the deception completely. And your family? Pressed Thomas Morrison, the board's youngest member at 62. What line of work are they in? My father was an educator. My mother worked in healthcare, Damon said, sticking closely to the truth while allowing the board members to make their own assumptions about the scope and prestige of those careers. The questioning continued for 30 minutes, covering everything from Damon's financial situation to his views on child-rearing and family values. Charlotte watched with growing admiration as he fielded every inquiry with composure and intelligence, never defensive but never apologetic about who he was or where he came from. "Well," Jonathan said finally, exchanging glances with his fellow board members, "this is certainly an unexpected development. We'll need time to discuss the implications for the trust." "What implications?" Charlotte asked, though she dreaded the answer. "The trust was established to ensure appropriate marriages within suitable social circles," Harold explained, with the kind of clinical detachment that had made him a successful banker. "We'll need to determine whether Mr. Williams meets the criteria established by your great-grandfather." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the racism underlying the criteria, the assumption that Charlotte's great-grandfather had intended her inheritance to remain within specific racial and class boundaries. "With respect, sir," Damon interjected, his voice carrying steel beneath its polite surface, "I'd be interested to know what specific criteria determine suitability beyond mutual love and respect between partners." The question hung in the air, like a challenge, forcing the board members to either articulate their prejudices explicitly or acknowledge the weakness of their position. Family background, shared values, social compatibility, Thomas offered weakly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "All of which Charlotte and I possess," Damon replied with quiet authority. "We share the same educational background, professional values, and commitment to family. If there are other criteria, perhaps they should be stated clearly." Charlotte felt a surge of pride at Damon's refusal to be intimidated, his willingness to confront the board's prejudices directly rather than attempting to appease them. "The board will deliberate and provide our decision within 30 days, Jonathan announced, clearly eager to end the uncomfortable confrontation. As they left the law offices, Charlotte felt a mixture of admiration and terror at what they just experienced. Damon had been magnificent, professional, composed, and unwilling to accept disrespect, disguised as formality. "That went better than I expected," she said, as they walked toward the street. "Did it?" Damon asked, his expression thoughtful. "Because I got the distinct impression that they've already decided to reject me based on factors that have nothing to do with my qualifications or character." The casual way he acknowledged the racism they'd just witnessed struck Charlotte as both heartbreaking and inspiring. This was his reality, the constant navigation of prejudice and assumptions that she'd never had to consider. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, realizing how inadequate the words were. "Don't apologize for their ignorance," Damon replied with gentle firmness, "but do decide what you're willing to fight for, because this isn't going to get easier." The rejection came exactly 1 week later, delivered via a formal letter that used language so carefully neutral it might have been designed by diplomatic lawyers. Charlotte read it twice before the implications fully sank in, her hands trembling as she processed the destruction of everything she'd worked toward. "The board has determined that the proposed union does not meet the criteria established by the trust's original provisions," the letter stated, with clinical precision. "Alternative arrangements must be made within the remaining time frame to ensure compliance with the trust's requirements." Charlotte called Damon immediately, her voice shaking with rage and disappointment when he answered. "They rejected us. They're using legal language to hide it. But they rejected you because you're black." "I'm sorry, Charlotte," Damon said, his voice carrying genuine sympathy. "I know how much this meant to you." "It's not over," Charlotte replied with sudden, fierce determination. "There has to be another way. Legal challenges, alternative interpretations of the trust language, something. Are you sure you want to fight this?" Damon asked gently. "It could take years, cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and there's no guarantee of success." Charlotte stared out her office window at the Manhattan skyline, considering the alternatives. She could accept defeat, sell her company, and start over with whatever remained after paying debts. She could marry Richard Ashford and secure the trust while sacrificing her self-respect. Or she could fight a system that had never been designed to accommodate her choices. "I want to fight," she said finally, "but I can't ask you to continue this charade while I wage legal war against my own family." "You're not asking," Damon replied. "I'm offering. If you're willing to fight for what's right, I'll stand with you." The simple declaration of loyalty from a man she'd hired to pretend to love her created an emotional crack in Charlotte's carefully maintained composure. "Why? You don't owe me anything beyond our original contract." "Maybe I've gotten invested in seeing justice done," Damon said, though something in his voice suggested deeper motivations. "Or maybe I've grown to care about your happiness more." than I expected when we started this." The admission hung between them, transforming their conversation from business transaction to something approaching genuine intimacy. Charlotte felt her heart rate accelerate as she processed the implications of his words. "Damon," she said quietly, "are we still pretending?" The question had been building for weeks, underlying every shared meal, every public appearance, every moment when their fake relationship had felt more real than any genuine connection she'd ever experienced. "I stopped pretending around the time you defended me to your mother," Damon replied with characteristic honesty. "I'm not sure when you stopped." Charlotte closed her eyes, acknowledging truths she'd been avoiding since their first evening together. "I think I stopped pretending when you made me realize that I'd been living my entire life according to other people's expectations." "So what do we do now?" Damon asked, his voice carrying vulnerability she'd never heard before. "I think we figure out what we actually want," Charlotte replied, surprised by her own clarity. "Independent of trust funds and family expectations and social pressure. And what do you want, Charlotte Bennett?" The question forced Charlotte to confront desires she'd spent years suppressing, dreams she'd dismissed as impractical or inappropriate for someone of her position. "I want to run my company without worrying about losing everything if I make the wrong personal choices," she said slowly, working through thoughts she'd never articulated. "I want to choose my own partner based on how he treats me, not what my family thinks of his pedigree, and I want to be loved for who I am, not what I represent." "Those are good wants," Damon said softly, "worth fighting for." "What about you?" Charlotte asked, turning the question back to him. "What do you want?" "I want to stop taking acting jobs that compromise my dignity," Damon replied without hesitation. "I want to build something meaningful with someone who sees my value beyond my utility to their agenda, and I want to wake up every morning next to someone who chooses me for reasons that have nothing to do with contracts or social expectations." The parallel desires they'd articulated created a moment of perfect understanding, a recognition that their fake relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, but both had been seeking. "So we fight the trust," Charlotte said, decision crystallizing in her voice. "Together, as real partners instead of actors playing roles." "Together," Damon agreed. "Though I should warn you, fighting institutional racism and family expectations is going to be harder than pretending to be engaged." "I'm ready," Charlotte replied, meaning it for the first time in her life. "But I have one condition." "What's that?" "When we appear in public as a couple from now on, it's not for show, it's because we choose to be together, whatever the consequences." "I can live with that condition," Damon said, and Charlotte could hear the smile in his voice. "In fact, I was hoping you'd suggest it." The confrontation Charlotte had been dreading finally arrived in the form of her mother, appearing unannounced at her penthouse on a Saturday morning, her face set in the expression of controlled fury that had terrorized Charlotte throughout her childhood. "We need to discuss your recent decisions," Eleanor announced, sweeping past Charlotte into the living room with the authority of someone accustomed to having her wishes treated as commands. "Good morning to you too, Mother," Charlotte replied, though she felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. "Don't be flippant with me, Charlotte Marie," Eleanor snapped, using the full name that had always preceded serious punishment. Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is furious, the Ashfords are insulted, and half of our social circle is gossiping about your inappropriate choice in men." Charlotte poured herself coffee with deliberately steady hands, refusing to let her mother's anger intimidate her the way it had when she was younger. "I've chosen someone who treats me with respect and makes me happy. If that's inappropriate, then perhaps our social circle needs to examine its values." "Values?" Eleanor's voice rose with incredulous anger. "What about the values I raised you with? What about respect for family, for tradition, for the sacrifices previous generations made to give you opportunities? What about my happiness?" Charlotte countered, surprised by her own courage in challenging her mother directly. "What about my right to choose my own life partner based on love rather than social acceptability?" Eleanor's expression shifted from anger to something approaching desperation. "Love fades, Charlotte. Security, social position, shared backgrounds, these things last. Your great-grandfather understood that when he established the trust provisions. Great-grandfather was a racist who believed women couldn't be trusted to make their own decisions," Charlotte replied with blunt honesty that made Eleanor flinch. "I won't let his prejudices control my life. And what about your company, your employees? Are you willing to sacrifice everything you've built for this infatuation? The question struck at Charlotte's deepest fears, the knowledge that her romantic choices had financial implications, extending far beyond her personal happiness. "I'm willing to fight for what's right," Charlotte said, though her voice carried less certainty than her words suggested. Eleanor studied her daughter with calculating attention, recognizing vulnerability she could exploit. "Richard Ashford is still available. A marriage to him would secure the trust, save your company and restore your social standing. It's not too late to make the practical choice." The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person, salvation that required only the sacrifice of authenticity and self-respect. Before Charlotte could respond, her intercom buzzed with Damon's voice. "Charlotte, I'm downstairs. We still on for brunch?" Eleanor's expression hardened as she realized Charlotte's inappropriate choice was about to join their conversation. "Send him up," she said with cold authority. "I'd like to speak with him." Charlotte felt panic flood her system as she realized her mother was about to confront Damon directly, probably with the intent of offering him money to disappear from Charlotte's life. "Mother, please don't. I'm not going to do anything inappropriate," Eleanor interrupted with icy dignity. "I simply want to understand what kind of man would encourage a woman to destroy her family relationships and financial security for the sake of romance." When Damon arrived, he took in the tension between Charlotte and her mother with the quick assessment of someone trained to read social dynamics. He kissed Charlotte's cheek with natural affection before turning to Eleanor with polite attention. "Mrs. Bennett, it's good to see you again." "Mr. Williams," Eleanor replied with frigid courtesy. "I was just discussing with Charlotte the practical implications of her recent choices. Perhaps you could help me understand your perspective on encouraging her to sacrifice everything for this relationship." Damon's expression remained calm, though Charlotte could see steel beneath his polite surface. "I've never encouraged Charlotte to sacrifice anything, Mrs. Bennett. I've supported her right to make her own choices about her life and happiness. And what about her company, her employees, her family relationships? Are those less important than her personal satisfaction?" "They're all important," Damon replied evenly. "But they shouldn't require Charlotte to deny her own worth or accept discrimination as the price of security." Eleanor's mask of politeness finally slipped, revealing the desperation beneath her controlled exterior. "What do you want? Money? A job? Whatever it is, we can discuss reasonable compensation for ending this relationship." The offer hit the room like a physical blow, transforming the conversation from family disagreement to naked bribery attempt. Charlotte felt humiliation flood her system as she watched her mother reduce Damon to a commodity that could be purchased and discarded. "Mother," Charlotte gasped, mortified by the blatant racism underlying the assumption that Damon's affection could be bought. But Damon's response surprised both women with its gentle firmness. "Mrs. Bennett, I understand you're trying to protect your daughter, but your protection is based on the assumption that she needs to be controlled rather than supported. Charlotte is intelligent, capable, and deserving of love that doesn't require her to diminish herself." "Pretty words," Eleanor replied with bitter dismissal. "But they won't pay her bills when the trust money is gone and her company collapses. Then we'll figure out another way," Damon said simply, taking Charlotte's hand with natural possessiveness. Together, the simple declaration of partnership in the face of Eleanor's financial threats created a moment of perfect clarity for Charlotte. She could choose security purchased through compromise, or she could choose love that required courage. "He's right, Mother," Charlotte said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "We'll figure it out together. And if that means losing the trust money, then that's what it means." Eleanor stared at her daughter for a long moment, recognizing that she'd lost a battle she'd expected to win easily. "You're making a mistake. That will destroy everything we've built for you." "Maybe," Charlotte acknowledged, "but it's my mistake to make." The legal battle began in earnest 3 weeks later, with Charlotte's team of attorneys filing a formal challenge to the trust's discriminatory provisions, while simultaneously preparing for the inevitable counterattack from the board's lawyers. The process consumed Charlotte's days and invaded her dreams, but she found unexpected strength in having a true partner to share the burden. Damon had moved into her penthouse, not as part of their original arrangement, but as a natural progression of their evolving relationship. His presence transformed the sterile luxury of Charlotte's home into something warmer, more lived in, more real. She came home to the smell of actual cooking instead of takeout containers, to music playing instead of silence, to someone who asked, about her day because he genuinely cared about the answer. "How bad is it?" Damon asked one evening, finding Charlotte surrounded by legal documents and financial projections that painted increasingly dire pictures of her company's future. "Bad," Charlotte admitted, gesturing to spreadsheets that showed her cash flow problems in stark numerical terms. "I can probably keep the company operating for another 6 months, maybe 8 if I lay off half the staff. After that," she didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood that without the trust money, Charlotte's business would collapse, taking with it the careers of 47 employees who'd helped build her success. "What about selling?" Damon suggested gently. "Taking whatever you can get and starting fresh?" Charlotte had considered that option, but it felt like admitting defeat before the real battle had even begun. "I've built this company from nothing. It's not just a business. It's proof that I can succeed on my own merits rather than family connections. And you can build another one," Damon replied with confidence that surprised Charlotte. "Whatever happens with the trust, whatever happens. With the current company, you have skills and experience that can't be taken away." The simple faith in her abilities created an emotional crack in Charlotte's carefully maintained composure. She'd spent so many years defining her worth through external validation, family approval, financial success, social acceptance, that she'd forgotten the internal qualities that actually determined her value. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could analyze their appropriateness or timing. Damon's response was immediate and unhesitating. "I love you too, which is why I need to tell you something that might change how you feel about this situation." Charlotte felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety, wondering what revelation would complicate their already complex circumstances. "I've been offered a job," Damon continued. "A good job. Head of business development for a consulting firm in Los Angeles. Excellent salary, partnership track, everything I've been working toward." The news hit Charlotte like cold water, forcing her to confront the possibility that their relationship might not survive the practical realities of career and geography. "That's wonderful," she managed, though her voice carried more shock than celebration. "You should take it." "Should I?" Damon asked, studying her expression with careful attention. "Even if it means leaving you in the middle of this legal battle?" Charlotte considered the question seriously, weighing her desire to keep him close against her genuine concern for his career and happiness. "I can't ask you to sacrifice your professional opportunities for my family drama." "You're not asking," Damon replied with gentle firmness. "I'm choosing, but I need to know that this choice is mutual, that we're building something together rather than just reacting to external pressure." The question forced Charlotte to examine the depth of her commitment, to decide whether their relationship was strong enough to justify the sacrifices it would require from both of them. "What are you saying?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I'm saying I'll turn down the job if you'll marry me for real," Damon replied with characteristic directness. "Not for trusts or family approval or social expectations, but because we love each other and want to build a life together." The proposal, delivered without fanfare or dramatic gesture, simply offered as a practical solution to their mutual desires, struck Charlotte as the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. "Yes," she said without hesitation, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "But only if you're sure about the job. I won't let you sacrifice your career for me." "I'm not sacrificing anything," Damon replied, pulling her into his arms with natural possessiveness. "I'm choosing love over convenience, partnership over personal advancement. It's the best decision I've ever made." As they held each other in the midst of legal documents and financial projections that represented the potential destruction of everything Charlotte had built, she felt something she'd never experienced before: complete acceptance of who she was and what she wanted, independent of external validation or family approval. "So we're really doing this," she said, the words carrying wonder rather than question. "We're really doing this," Damon confirmed. "Together, whatever comes next." How's this story hitting you so far? Tell us in the comments. If you're loving it, type 1, if not type 0. We want to know what you think. The charity gala where Charlotte and Damon made their public stand had been planned for months, a fundraiser for literacy programs that would bring together New York's social elite in a celebration of philanthropy and networking. Charlotte had originally viewed it as an opportunity to demonstrate her social connections and business success. Instead, it became the venue where she finally chose authenticity over acceptance. They arrived together, Charlotte in a stunning red gown that she'd chosen specifically because Eleanor had once told her red was too bold for someone of her position. Damon wore a classic tuxedo that transformed his already impressive presence into something that commanded attention from the moment they entered the ballroom. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Conversations paused, heads turned, and the kind of whispered speculation that had followed Charlotte throughout her social life intensified to a degree she'd never experienced before. "Charlotte, darling," Victoria Chen approached with the kind of aggressive friendliness that preceded social ambush. "You look radiant. Marriage must agree with you." "Thank you, Victoria," Charlotte replied evenly, noting how her friend's gaze catalogued every detail of her appearance and Damon's presence with calculating precision. "I heard about the trust situation," Victoria continued with full sympathy. "Such a shame when family businesses become complicated by personal choices. I'm sure it will all work out for the best." The comment carried obvious implications about Charlotte's personal choices and their consequences, delivered with the kind of plausible deniability that allowed Victoria to maintain innocence while landing her verbal attack. "Actually, it's working out exactly as it should," Charlotte replied with calm confidence that surprised even herself. "I've learned that some things are more valuable than money, and some principles are worth more than social acceptance." Before Victoria could respond, Jonathan Ashford approached with his son Richard in tow, clearly intending to create a public confrontation that would force Charlotte to acknowledge her mistake. "Charlotte," Jonathan said with cold formality, "I trust you've given thought to our previous conversation about practical arrangements. It's not too late to reconsider your position." The threat was delivered with boardroom precision. Acknowledge the error of her ways, abandon Damon and accept Richard as the appropriate choice that would restore her access to the trust money. "Actually, Jonathan," Charlotte replied with steel in her voice, "I've given it considerable thought, and I've realized that any arrangement requiring me to deny my own worth isn't practical at all." She felt Damon's hand settle on her back, a gesture of support that gave her courage to continue. "I'd like to make an announcement," Charlotte said, her voice carrying clearly enough to be heard by nearby guests who were already listening intently to the confrontation. The ballroom gradually quieted as Charlotte commanded attention with the kind of natural authority she'd inherited from generations of public speakers. "Many of you know that I've been facing challenges related to my family's trust requirements," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. "Requirements that would have me choose a husband based on social acceptability rather than love, compatibility, or character." A ripple of shocked murmurs passed through the crowd as Charlotte openly acknowledged the discriminatory nature of her family's financial arrangements. "I want you all to know that I've chosen love over money, authenticity over acceptance, and partnership over privilege," she continued, taking Damon's hand with natural affection. "Damon and I are married because we love each other, because we respect each other, and because we believe that's the only foundation worthy of building a life together." The silence that followed her declaration was deafening, broken only by scattered applause from unexpected sources, staff members, younger guests, and a few older attendees who seemed to appreciate her courage, even if they didn't share her choices. Furthermore, Charlotte continued, her confidence growing with each word, "I want to publicly thank those who've shown me through their reactions exactly what values they prioritize and what kind of people they truly are. It's been enlightening." Helena, who'd been standing near the back of the crowd, pushed through the gathered guests with the kind of controlled fury that had intimidated Charlotte throughout her childhood. "Charlotte, this is neither the time nor the place for family drama," she hissed, clearly mortified by her daughter's public defiance. "You're right, Mother," Charlotte replied with calm that surprised both of them. "Family drama shouldn't be public entertainment, but standing up for love and equality isn't drama, it's character." The exchange between mother and daughter played out before an audience of New York's social elite, many of whom had never witnessed such direct confrontation of established social hierarchies. "You're destroying everything we've built," Eleanor said with desperate intensity. "Your reputation, your business, your future, all for what? Teenage rebellion at 32? "I'm building something better," Charlotte replied with quiet conviction. "A life based on authentic values rather than inherited prejudices, a marriage based on mutual respect rather than social acceptability, and a future that I can be proud of regardless of who approves." As she and Damon left the gala, Charlotte felt something she'd never experienced before, Complete alignment between her public persona and her private values, total acceptance of the consequences of choosing authenticity over approval. No regrets? Damon asked as they walked through the cool evening air toward their car. None, Charlotte replied without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually living instead of just performing. 1 year later, Charlotte stood in the kitchen of their Brooklyn brownstone, watching Damon prepare Sunday dinner with the same careful attention he brought to everything he did. The house was smaller than her Manhattan penthouse had been, but it felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived, filled with books, music, the laughter of Damon's sisters, who'd become her family in ways she'd never experienced before. The financial projections look good, she said, reviewing documents spread across the kitchen table. Better than good, actually. We might be able to hire 2 more employees next quarter. Charlotte's new company, Bennett and Associates Consulting, had been built from the ground up after she'd sold her event planning business to pay legal fees. The consulting work was different, more focused on helping small businesses navigate growth and organizational challenges, but it was profitable and personally satisfying in ways her previous career had never been. I'm proud of you, Damon said, his voice carrying the kind of genuine admiration that still surprised Charlotte with its warmth. Building something meaningful from nothing, doing work that actually helps people, it suits you. The legal battle over the trust had ultimately been unsuccessful. The courts had ruled that while the discriminatory provisions were morally objectionable, they were legally enforceable given the trust's age and the specificity of its language. Charlotte had lost access to $50 million, but she'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that she could succeed on her own merits, independent of family money or social approval. Any regrets about the LA job? She asked, a question that had become a running joke between them, but still carried underlying affection. Only that I didn't turn it down sooner, Damon replied, the same answer he gave every time she asked. Though I have to admit, corporate consulting pays better when you're not splitting your time with community theater. Damon had found work with a diversity consulting firm, helping companies develop inclusive policies and practices. The work was meaningful, well compensated, and allowed him to pursue acting projects that interested him rather than just paid the bills. Speaking of community theater, Charlotte said, gesturing toward tickets pinned to their refrigerator, your mother called. She and your father want to know if we're coming to Angela's graduation party next month. The easy integration into Damon's family had been one of the unexpected joys of their marriage. His parents, initially skeptical about their whirlwind romance and Charlotte's privileged background, had welcomed her with warmth that felt effortless after years of trying to earn approval from her own family. Of course we're going, Damon replied, settling beside her at the table. Though I should warn you, Angela's been asking when we're going to give her nieces and nephews to spoil. The topic of children had come up frequently in recent months, part of their ongoing conversations about building a future together that honored both their dreams and their shared values. And what do you tell her? Charlotte asked, though she suspected she already knew his answer. I tell her we're still enjoying being newlyweds who can travel on a whim and sleep in on weekends, Damon replied with a grin. But that we're open to whatever the future brings. Charlotte smiled, recognizing the perfect balance between planning and spontaneity that characterized their approach to their marriage and their life together. Eleanor called yesterday, she said, sharing news that still surprised her with its emotional complexity. She wants to have lunch next week. The relationship with her mother had been slowly healing over the past year, helped by Eleanor's growing recognition that Charlotte's happiness mattered more than social conventions, and her grudging admission that Damon was perfectly pleasant when she bothered to get to know him. Are you ready for that? Damon asked, understanding the complicated emotions involved in rebuilding family relationships damaged by years of conditional love and discriminatory expectations. I think so, Charlotte replied thoughtfully. I'm finally at a place where I can love her without needing her approval and accept her limitations without taking them personally. As they prepared dinner together, Damon cooking while Charlotte handled side dishes with skills she'd developed since leaving her former life of takeout and restaurant meals, she reflected on the transformation that had brought them to this moment. Do you ever miss it? Damon asked, reading her thoughtful expression with the intuition that had developed between them. The money, the social position, the certainty that came with inherited privilege? Charlotte considered the question seriously, looking around their modest home filled with evidence of the life they'd built together. photographs from their small wedding ceremony, artwork from local artists, books that reflected their shared intellectual curiosity. I miss the security, she admitted honestly, but I don't miss the price I had to pay for it, and I definitely don't miss the person I was when I thought other people's approval determined my worth. Who are you now? Damon asked, the question delivered with genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Charlotte smiled, feeling the truth of her answer in her bones. I'm someone who chooses love over convenience, authenticity over acceptance, and partnership over privilege. I'm someone who believes that building something meaningful with the right person is worth more than maintaining something hollow for the wrong reasons. Those are good things to be, Damon said, pulling her into his arms with the natural affection that had grown from fake kisses into real love that changed everything. As they held each other in their kitchen filled with the warmth of home and the promise of futures built on mutual respect and authentic love, Charlotte felt the deep satisfaction of knowing she'd chosen correctly, not just in her marriage, but in her values, her priorities, and her definition of what constituted a life well lived.